and then we're going to share the screen. Okay. 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 I may be toggling from one screen to the other, but like I mentioned today, what we're going to do is that we're going to focus on the last part of this chapter. Okay, so not to worry if you see that there's certain things that's not there. Okay, so this is what is going to happen. Okay, this is what's going to happen. Okay, before we actually start on today's lesson, okay, again, just to reiterate what are the things that you need to do. Okay, just let me see who needs to come in. Arena. Okay. Okay. Okay, before we start, okay, first thing first. Okay, first thing first. Okay. Okay, first thing first, Okay, today what we're going to cover for our lesson is actually to look at two things. Okay, one of them we're going to look at the reasons for Vietminh victory and for the French defeat. Now, during the previous lesson, we already mentioned that in 1954, because of the Battle of the Dien Bien Phu, it was a winner, kind of a winner takes all type of war between the French and the Vietminh. They have actually been fighting since 1946. So from 1946 onwards, okay, from 1946 onward, what happened was that they have been fighting all the way to 1954, which if you put that together in context, it was approximately about 8 years. Now, during the 8 years, there was sporadic fighting between the Vietminh and the French, and all this while the French were gaining a little bit more leeway. They were actually doing a little bit better as compared to the French. Now, we have to understand at that context, the power struggle has started to shift a little bit. In the case of the Vietminh has become stronger as a result of Japanese intervention during the Japanese occupation, and the French themselves was actually revealing from a defeat that they were suffering during the Second World War. They were the countries that were being defeated by the Axis power, by the Italians and the German, and as a result, there was the establishment of a so-called a Vichy government, which is actually a pro-Nazi government, and that was why the French have never been able to regain its power. By the time they came back, the reason why the French did not end up losing the battle totally in the beginning period of time was because at that point of time, the French actually had the support of the British, who came in to help to so-called to disarm the Japanese, and at the same time, it also come in. Okay, it also come in because the French themselves were also being very weak because of the reason that the French was also requiring a lot of support from the Americans, and that was why they were able to maintain their status in Vietnam all this while. Now, there were many battles that's going on. The Vietminh was actually gaining about 2/3 of the whole of Vietnam, with its stronghold mostly in Hanoi area. Okay, that means in the northern part of Vietnam. The reason is, of course, they have Chinese support coming in, and the French, they are more settled in the southern part of Vietnam. But do understand that at this current point of time, the Vietnamese and the French were fighting in all parts. I repeat, all parts of Vietnam. Now, for today's lesson and for your examination, the focus is actually to understand why is it that the Vietminh was able to gain a victory, why is it that the French were being defeated. And so, as I already indicated over here, you should be focusing on the reason. Understand? You should be focusing on the reason. If you look at the slides, you'll notice that there is a lot of elaboration on certain key examples. They are actually concrete examples for you to use to understand why is it that the Vietminh was able to win. There were certain things that they have done, and these are concrete examples to illustrate why is it that they won. So don't get caught up with writing or learning too much about the elaboration, but focus on the key reason and then use all those examples that I give you as elaboration to answer the SCQ question. Okay, so please take that clearly. I don't want you all to be overwhelmed. I repeat, I don't want you all to be overwhelmed by all the content that is happening, and then you lose focus of what you actually need to study. So the focus is on reason. Focus is on reason, and then use the example to illustrate the elaboration to to illustrate how the reason actually works to the benefit of the Vietminh or to the demerit of the French. Okay, so let's start off with the first one. Why is it that the Vietminh was able to gain a victory? Okay, you have to remember three S. Okay, first S stands for strong support base. So what is this strong support base I'm referring to? Now the Vietminh, Ho Chi Minh learned a lot from um, Mao Zedong in China. And what they did was that because both of them are agrarian society, both Vietnam and China is an agrarian society it comprises of mainly peasants. So the Vietminh tried their level best to work a similar policy as what they were doing for the Vietnamese as what Mao Zedong and the Communist Party was doing for the Chinese peasant. So they tried to introduce reform. For example, in 1944, where they actually started this whole entire August Revolution to take over from the French, to take over from the Japanese, they focus on issues that are popular among the people. Remember, the communists always believe that you need to touch the people's heart, and therefore you need to focus on things that are important and concerns the masses. So what are the masses interested about? They were interested about basic things like food, basic things like land. So in 1944, there was a series of huge famine that was going around in Vietnam. Okay, because most of the food production have come to almost a standstill, and the Japanese have taken whatever excess food that they have to finance their own people, their own Japanese people during the Second World War. As a result, there was huge spread famine in Vietnam, and what the Vietnamese or the Vietminh decided to do was to introduce programs first to help the people by looting granary. Okay, looting granary. So whatever storage they went to loot them, and then they started distributing a little bit like your modern day Robin Hood. And they also, with all the land that was under their control, they confiscated the land from the landlord and then they redistributed back to the peasant. This is not new because this is what the communists has always believed in creating what we call a eco society. Now, the next thing that they focused on was to create educational reform to help the Vietnamese people to level up their literacy skill. So they teach them basic skills like literacy, basic skills like basic engineering. And at the same time, they also taught some of the younger um, Vietnamese certain form of military skill. And in the process of doing so, through the literacy, through the basic engineering, they also took the opportunity to indoctrinate the people, meaning to inculcate them with the correct values of nationalism and also in the idea of communism. And this is actually a very effective method that the Vietminh has been doing. That means it had to went on to win the hearts and the mind of the people. And throughout this, they managed to create a very important support base, and that allows the communists to continue to provide supply, intelligence report, and also gather a huge amount of manpower in order for them to fight against the French. Okay, so the reason why the Vietminh was victorious was because they already have the popular support of the masses. And the reason why they have the support of the masses was because of the policy and the reforms and things that they were doing in order to so-called to win the support of the people itself. Okay, so that is the first thing that I want you to pay attention to on the Vietminh victory. Okay, so far so good. Okay, now let me move on to the second point. Okay, again, like I mentioned, you already had the PowerPoint slide. Don't be too preoccupied in copying all the things. You can do so, transfer it for your own reference purposes, but pay attention to the bad things I'm going to share with you. Okay, again, the second thing is about strategy. Okay, this picture is actually downloaded from your textbook, so you can actually go back to your textbook to have a more so-called clearer picture about this. Now, at the same, the Vietminh was led by a very strong military general, okay, Nguyen Giap, okay, Vok Nguyen Giap, and this general was the one who was pivotal in winning many battles that the Vietminh have against the French. Now, the Vietminh knows that they can't attack the French because the French do have the support of the British, and the Vietminh was actually not equipped. Although they have the military strength, they have the military support, but they do not have the power, all the equipment and the military so-called equipment in order to fight a battle against the French and the British. And what they did was that they decided to do things in the guerrilla tactics. Okay, they decided to use what we call the hit and run tactic. Now, why is it that they go underground? Why is it that they decided to use this thing called this tunnel and underground shelter? The reason was actually very, very simple. The Vietnamese, Vietminh, reside mostly in villages, and they use the benefit of the forest in order to fight the war. The reason was very simple, because that has always been their strategy even before the time that they were fighting against the French. When they were fighting against the Japanese, they were also hiding in the forest, going against anti-colonial, anti-Japanese. Now, because the Western powers and the Japanese, they do have aerial support, meaning they have helicopters, they have aerial attacks, and that allowed them to smoke the people out by literally via bombing, okay, dropping of bombs over the forest area. And because of all these things, in order to protect the Vietminh stronghold, they started to make full use of their small physique. Okay, you notice that the Vietnamese are actually smaller in size as compared to the Europeans who are bigger. They started to dig underground tunnels and they live underground. Okay, and most of their places, if you can see from the picture itself, are actually a series of underground tunnels. Okay, the series of underground tunnels that goes up, and some of these underground tunnels go into traps. Some of them will go into what we call firing posts that's hidden. Later, I'll show you a picture of this. And they can also go to places like, for example, first aid station. And where do they get the power? They get the power through generation of using the bicycle. So they use bicycles. They are very creative using bicycle to create their weapon, their first aid posts and electricity. And the other thing is, of course, all their places are actually all these tunnels. Okay, some can be isolated. You notice that there are some of these yellow traps that you can see over here. These are actually doors which can be shut behind them when they are running against the so-called the French. So even if the French manage to discover the tunnel and they will have difficulty climbing into a tunnel because they are too big, and there is at any point of time the Vietnamese being small and nimble could actually lock up all these places, and then they can actually trap the so-called the French or the Western soldiers, and that was actually a very effective strategy that they were using. Okay, so this is what we call the hit and run tactic, using camouflage, using sabotage. So that was the main key strategy that the Vietnamese were using, and they use it to great effect. Okay, now you do not have the next few slides. I'm just going to share with you something about what I went to about 2 years ago. Okay, later I'm going to give you a picture of this, but before that, okay, the next thing is that the Americans in the later part of the Vietnam War, okay, actually refers the underground tunnel as what we call a black echo, because these tunnels are actually very, very scary. You cannot see what is right in front of you unless it's in close distance. And on top of that, the tunnels are very narrow that requires you to literally squat and walk. And it's very, very difficult if you are a big size person. So for example, Ismail will have a problem. Okay, since he's not here, I can joke about him. Ismail is a problem because he will have difficulty getting into the tunnel. People like, for example, Alan, Benedict, okay, or even the girls, you should not have any problem navigating in the tunnel itself. Later, I'm going to show you. So as I mentioned, the tunnel was actually a very good base for communist attack. So there are villages that are totally built underground, and there are actually numerous booby traps that they could use. They could plan what we call trip wires they will set out grenade. And even when they manage to trick the people to go into the tunnel may end up going into traps. For example, scorpion, poison snake that will pour onto the head of the enemy troops. So these are very, very important strategies that um, the Vietnamese is using. So their main focus is that they uses their physique, they uses their strength, which is doing sabotage attack to gain a victory the um, over the French. Okay, so this is a picture that I'm sharing with you. This is a picture of the Chu Chi Tunnel. This is actually found in South Vietnam. Okay, to you, if you are looking at this picture now, you'll notice that it looks very innocent. It just looks like a outgrown vegetation that's found in the middle of the jungle, but this is actually the firing post of one of the tunnel. You may not be able to see it, but this is actually the firing post. Okay, if you look very, very closely, okay, that from here, there's actually a small little opening that allows the Vietminh to see incoming French troops. So this is where the openings are. They can place their gun here, and the minute that the soldiers came near, they could either prepare a booby trap right in front, or they can use this and started firing at the soldiers and manage to cripple them. So that is one way of the sabotage work that I'm talking about. Okay. Okay, this is a picture of me, okay, struggling very, very hard, okay, to try to get into the hole. This is how the entrance of the tunnel looks like, okay. And I was with my family. All of them are my kids. They are all very gung-ho to try it. I decided to do it myself, but you could see that I was really struggling. So you can imagine the European being bigger size, about my size or even bigger than me, will definitely have a lot of difficulty climbing into the hole like this. Okay, once this wooden cover is being placed and covered with leaf, you would never know that there is actually a entrance to the tunnel from here. Okay, this is the space that I have inside the tunnel. When I'm walking there, because of the space that I have and because of the way I have exerting myself, I have literally have to duck walk from one place to another. It makes it very, very difficult for me to walk. And even for a short 25 meters to 50 meters walk from one end of a tunnel to the other end of the tunnel, I was already gasping for breath. So you can imagine once you're going there, because of the low drop in oxygen level, it was very, very difficult for the Europeans or the French to try to sieve out all the so-called the Vietminh, because there is no way they could catch up with them in that confined space that you see over here. So that was a very effective strategy that was used in the northern part of Vietnam. Okay, so once all these things are over, if you got a chance to go to Vietnam, do go and visit the Chu Chi Tunnel, okay, in the southern part of Vietnam, because that was one of those highlights that you should see that really shows the inventiveness and the resilience of the Vietminh in fighting against the French and later the Americans. Okay, so this is another picture. This is how you have to move from one place to another. Literally, you have to either do a duck walk or you can have to walk with your body bent. And sometimes this tunnel can stretch for hundreds of meters. So you can imagine how difficult it is. Once you're in, the only way is either to go back or you have to go to the other end. So it's actually very, very harrowing. It's actually very scary if you realize that you're on your own and you do not know what's going to happen on the other end. Okay. Now, the third S is actually support. Okay. Now, Ho Chi Minh that I mentioned was very close to Mao Zedong. Okay, this is a picture of Mao Zedong. He's a leader. He's a communist leader of China, and they have won the civil war. Okay, in 1949 October, and they have declared that China was a communist country. And due to the proximity that China had with Vietnam, China and Vietnam worked very, very closely. The Chinese Communist Party was very willing to support. And remember the same idea of the Cold War situation, China was very eager to find common friends surrounding them. And Vietnam sharing a common border with China was one of the friends that they were looking out for. So what did the Chinese government do? The Chinese Communist Party helped by providing military aid, machine gun, ammunition, and communication equipment. And most importantly, they also help and teach them how to fight a people's war. How did Ho Chi Minh manage to rally the people to fight against the war against the French was due to the advice that we have gotten from Mao Zedong, because Mao was the one who actually fought the People's War very effectively. Mao Zedong and the Chinese government were also instrumental in helping Nguyen Giap's, okay, to fight in the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. Remember, they were the one who supplied them with the military aid, the artillery and the ammunition, and also teach them how to operate them and come up with the correct strategy to fight with the French during the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, which resulted to, of course, the French defeat in Dien Bien Phu, resulting to the French withdrawing from Vietnam. Okay, so that was the three S's that represents the reason for Vietminh's victory. Okay, now let's focus on the other aspect. Okay, remember when we talk about perspective in history, the reason why one is stronger, the other one has to present itself as weaker. So what was happening to the French? Now the French were having a lot of issues. One of them was this poor military planning that I mentioned to you, and the leadership. Now the French was very equipped in fighting a conventional warfare. That was also the reason why they lost against the Germans during World War II. Okay, now they were not very good with counterinsurgent tactics, and their whole idea of guerrilla warfare was actually very, very minimal. So they were able to fight a all-out frontal war. They were unable to fight against the type of counterinsurgent guerrilla warfare which the communists was actually fighting using to their benefit. Now, one of the biggest problems, there were many classic examples that show that there were poor military planning. You already saw one in Dien Bien Phu, okay, when the French believed that they actually have the upper hand by locking themselves up in a valley in Dien Bien Phu, hoping to engage the Vietminh, trying to wipe them out by having a frontal war. But what they did not anticipate was because of the artillery that was moved up to the top of the valley that created a rainstorm of bombs onto Dien Bien Phu itself. So that was one fundamental error that the French was having. Now, the second one, which I'm going to talk about in the next few slides, is Operation Lear. Okay, Operation Lear was a battle that was fought in the beginning phases of the so-called the Indochina War. That means between the Vietminh and the French. It was an operation that has a lot of promise. It was also a so-called a winner-takes-all type of battle, but at the end of it, it also failed, which I'm going to talk about in this situation. Okay, the French biggest problem was that because they were already exhausted, military exhausted during the Second World War, they were unable to continue to sustain the fighting. They require a lot of support from the British, from the Americans, and they actually found those support wanting. That means that they couldn't get the support that they want, and that was the reason why the French ended up losing, okay, the war, because it didn't have the support from the other Western powers. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about Operation Lear. Now, Operation Lear happened in the early phases. Okay, Dien Bien Phu happened in 1954. Operation Lear happened in 1947. That was the point of time when the battle was. That was the point of time when the French just returned to Vietnam. And that was they returned to Vietnam around 1946, and there was already an Indochina War going on between the French and, of course, the Vietnamese, because of the unhappiness that they have with regards to the agreement. Remember that Ho Chi Minh did not get the recognition that he wanted to make Vietnam into a free state under the French Union. So there was fighting that's going on. Now the French received intel, okay, that there was the Vietminh has a stronghold in this place known as the Vien Bac. It is at the northern Tonkin area that I'm going to show you the map, or you can actually look at the map in the next slide. But what happened was that this was a all-out offensive. The French decided to bring about some 12,000 men, and the purpose was actually to capture or to kill the head of the operation. In this case, they were aiming to kill Ho Chi Minh and people like Nguyen Giap, okay, the military leader. And once you can get rid of these so-called leaders, the whole entire operation will lose its head of state, and that will result to them losing the war. Pretty much like what you see in cases when they were going after Osama bin Laden, when they were fighting against the Al Qaeda in the terrorist movement. The minute once Osama bin Laden is gone, the leadership is gone, you notice that the war actually was between against terrorism became subdued. So that was that type of situation. So they were trying to destroy the Vietminh. They were trying to destroy the Vietminh in this triangular area known in the northern Tonkin area known as Vien Bac. Okay, now I'm moving on to the next slide. This is for you to understand. Okay, this is the northern part of Vietnam. Okay, and Dien Bien Phu is over here. Okay, where my arrow is pointing now. I'm going to hold this for a while. This area here was Dien Bien Phu. Okay, so that was the, so like I mentioned to you, fighting was taking place in all parts of Vietnam. But however, the French realized that they have a stronghold in this particular area. Okay, so this triangular area that you see over here is actually the stronghold of the Vietminh. And Hanoi is over here. Hai Phong, we talked about it just in case you forgot. In book number 1, Hai Phong was actually the so-called the coastal area. Sorry, it's actually the coastal area that I mentioned to you in the previous in book 1. This is actually the harbor that the French wanted to make use of in order to gain trade with China. So this is actually, so this is the capital of so-called the northern part of Vietnam at this point of time, and this is the triangular area that I'm talking about. Okay, so what is actually happening? Operation Lear was to capture this stronghold. Okay, to capture this stronghold. And what is their strategy? The failure of the strategy is because of this particular reason. Okay, first of all, they wanted to, the French do have a strong air force. So they are going to send in the air force to drop so-called paratroopers. That means people using parachute to drop down the army. And they are going to set off in this place in Trong Dong and Chiang Mai. So this will be this and Bac Chan. So these 3 places will be where the French wanted to drop their military people. Okay. Now at the same time, when you drop people like this, they need to be protected. They need to be protected. So what is going to happen is that at the same time, there will be what we call a mixed column. A mixed column consisting of infantry. Okay, for those of you who play games, or for those of you very clear, for the girls, I know you may have a problem. Let me explain. Infantry are what we call foot soldiers. So you're going to have a group of foot soldiers. Armor means that your tank. Artilleries are big guns that is used to fire at long range, just to clear the ground before your infantry and your armor can go in. That means they go and create disturbance. They start blowing up bases because they can fire cannons at long distance. So this 3 so-called mixed column will travel from this place from Lang Song to Chao Bang, and later they will come down to support this group of people who are being parachuted down to take over Ba Chang. Okay, so far so good. Okay, and at the same time, on the south, okay, from the south, they will be along this place known as the Red River. Okay, if you remember the Red River, that was the river that the French was actually hoping to use. Okay, in book number 1, we'll talk about why they wanted trade in with China. They wanted to make use of the Red River. So the Red River will have what we call an amphibious force. That means they will have boats coming in with soldiers, and they will provide military support from the south. Okay, so come in. So if you look at this, it sounds like a pretty good strategy. Very, very wonderful strategy. Soldiers parachuted down, military support coming in to help out. At the same time, from the bottom, you have another amphibious group taking the sea. So you have your air, sea, and land. It sounds wonderful. And if the strategy has worked very well for the French, they will have won the battle. But what actually happened? Okay, what actually happened? first of all, when they were trying to use the airborne force, okay, and you notice that highlighted in blue, this is actually the problem that happened. Okay, now the first thing, when they tried to send in the 1,000 over troopers, what they did not realize was that you can't be dropping 1,000 people at the same time. So they had to carry out multiple trips. And this multiple trips took several hours. By the time the whole entire 1,000 paratroopers actually come in, it took them several hours, and the Vietminh has already been able to regroup and withdraw to a safe zone within the Bát Chang triangular area. Next thing, remember the infantry, the armor, and the artillery that we're talking about to provide the support for the 1,000 over troopers? Well, it does, but the problem is that it was very, very slow because you're talking about a big group of people moving on land. So as a result of this, by the time they reached the vicinity, around that was almost about a few days later. So they could not provide the support for the paratroopers. The last one is, of course, the amphibious force. You have to go upstream. But the problem is, if you have an amphibious force using boat, okay, that is also going to take you a little bit more time. So even first, they could not have a concerted attack because all three areas were not coordinated. So because of the lack of coordination, they were unable to mount a successful attack on the Vietminh. And after just 1 month, okay, they realized that they are not getting the headway. There's no way that they could have that element of surprise to fight against the Vietminh. And therefore, as a result of this, okay, it led to the calling off of Operation Lear. So the operation ended within a month. So that means that they could not succeed in taking over Bát Chang. They also could not succeed in getting rid of people, the key leaders, like for example, Ho Chi Minh, because Ho Chi Minh has already escaped into the stronghold. Okay, they are protected. Same also explained to people like the General Nguyen Gap, because he was also hiding inside the stronghold itself. So that means Operation Lear failed to do what it's supposed to do. Okay, now the next problem that the Viet Minh was able to win was because of the French action. Now, the French had a very unpopular political ally. Now, the French realized that in order to fight against the alternative government that was set up by Viet Minh, the French need to do something to rally the people. And one of the things that they tried to do was to go back and look for the government that they were looking at, which was the imperial system. So they went and started looking for Bao Dai. They managed to pick up Bao Dai because Bao Dai was actually supposedly he was supposed to be the advisor. If you remember in the previous lesson, Bao Dai was supposed to be the advisor for Ho Chi Minh's government because Bao Dai decided to abdicate. But Bao Dai realized that he was not really doing his job well. He actually went back to France. He was actually French educated. He went back to France. And when he went to France, he was invited again by the French government to come back to Vietnam to become the head of state for the state of Vietnam. So Bao Dai was willing to do that. He thought that he would be doing his best to rally the people. So he came back to the head of state. But the problem with him was that he already have a very poor reputation. Why is it that he's having poor reputation? First thing, he himself is not a very charismatic person because he is Western educated, he's French educated. He is more he's a Francophile, meaning he's somebody who is very pro-French. So that already set him aside with the Vietnamese people. So it's not popular among the Vietnamese people. On top of that, he has also been very unpopular because he was working with the French. He was also working with the French before the war, during the war, under the Vichy government, and then with the Japanese during the Japanese occupation. So because of all the atrocities that was being done by the French and the Japanese, Bao Dai was perceived as a puppet ruler who was very, very unpopular because the people were unhappy with the French and the Japanese themselves. So Bao Dai took the brunt of all this so-called unhappiness. And the problem was also Bao Dai also created a government that was formed by people of very dubious reputation. These people seem to be more pro-French, and they are also unwilling to work for the welfare of the people. So because of that, Bao Dai's government was very unpopular. So that means that in the southern part of Vietnam, where the French do have a slightly stronger uh, stronghold, okay, Bao Dai's government was also unable to win the support from the Vietnamese people. So as a result of all these things, because of the unpopularity of the ally that the French have chosen, at the same time because of all those strategies that uh, the French have adopted, that makes it very, very difficult for them to win the war. Okay. And of course, we have talked about it in the previous lesson that during the Geneva Conference in May and July 1954, okay, what happened was that they decided that it's about time. The French decided that there were no way that they continue the battle. So in 1954, during the Geneva Conference, okay, they this was actually a conference to talk about what was happening in Indochina. So there were representatives from many countries, okay, because of the area of the region, Cambodia, China, France, Laos, UK, because United Kingdom was there disarming the Japanese, the United States, the Soviet Union, the Vietminh, and also the state of Vietnam, which is led by Bao Dai, Vietminh led by Ho Chi Minh. So all the representatives went in and have a meeting over the 2 months in 1954. And during the 2 month meeting, they actually went about um, signing what we call the Geneva Peace Accord. There were altogether 10 documents. Okay, there were altogether 10 documents. 3 of them were military documents, 6 of them were declaration, and there was also a final declaration of the Geneva Conference. That means what was the final result, and that was supposed to be announced on July 21st, 1954. And all these documents are actually non-treaty binding. What does that mean? It means that the country will not be penalized if they refuse to act on it. So I want you to bear that in mind. So this Geneva Conference is really just a paper exercise where everybody says something, promise to work on something, but they can choose not to do anything and there will not be any form of implication. I do not know why is that Geneva have all these things. I think you all know about this whole global warming, the peace accord and all these things that's going on. It seems to have this certain issues because many of these countries they all go in with their own interest in mind. So you can see you have at that point of time in 1954, we're talking about the heightening of the Cold War tension. And what you have over here are countries on both sides of the Cold War situation. So understandably, they went there to protect their own interests, and they will only act only if their interest is not being affected. They will only act if their interests are being protected, and they will not act something that is contrary because they do not want a situation that they find them situation being compromised. So this Geneva Peace Accord in 1954 was a 10 document thing, which is non-binding, and at the same time, the final decision was actually not made. Okay, so what was the key thing that we're talking about? Okay, some of the key ideas. First, the French will withdraw. Obviously, the French was the one who declared. They were the one who say, they are going to withdraw. And they are going to end French colonialism in Vietnam. So that was one of the terms of one of so-called the agreement that was being made. The French unilaterally declared that they are going to withdraw and they are going to end French colonialism. Now, the second thing, which is a military agreement, is that they are now going to divide Vietnam into 2 halves, where one half is it will be divided at the what we call the 17th parallel. Okay. If you remember, Korea was 38 parallel. So this is a 17 parallel. 38 parallel is somewhere over up right here. Imagine if this map is extended, it will be somewhere around here. Singapore is right below, so that is the equator. So it is actually a line in terms of degrees. So in the 17th parallel, on the 17th parallel, there will be a division of Vietnam, and Vietnam will be given independence for the DRV, which is the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, that was led by Ho Chi Minh, with Hanoi being the capital, and independence will be given. Now, the South will also become a independent country, and that will be under a imperial monarchy system led by Emperor Bao Dai. And in this case, to protect Emperor Bao Dai and the non-communist government, the Americans decided to come in. And this time round, they decided to go out and support the Vietnamese. Okay, again, why was there a change in the mindset? If you remember, in the earlier phases around 1954, in the earlier phases when the French was still in, the Americans chose not to go in and support. They wanted to protect. They were still adopting a policy of containment. They do not want the domino effect to take place. That was why once the French realized that they are not strong enough to keep the equilibrium, the Americans have to take up the responsibility. And that was why in Vietnam, they found themselves having a new Western power coming into the picture. And in this case, it was the Americans. So the other military agreement is found in point number 2. They decided that they're going to withdraw the troops within 300 days. That means within a year, the Vietminh will move out from the south. The American, the French, and the British troops will move out from the north. So it is also to save all those people that was fighting in places like Dien Bien Phu, etc. So to allow them to retreat below the 17th parallel. So there is another agreement. Okay, this is the interesting thing. If you look at the last point here, the situation in Vietnam was not supposed to be a permanent one. This was slightly different with the case of Korea. During the Korean War situation in 1953, when they signed the agreement was that there were going to be two different governments. There was never any indication that the two governments will come together to have what we call a common election to find a common government. In the case of Vietnam, there was actually a prerequisite that was being set in place. In 1956, they promised that they are going to create a referendum. And in this referendum, they will carry out a referendum in South Vietnam. That means that they want, and remember, the Americans are only there temporarily. And Bao Dai's government is going to be there. They are going to see whether in 2 years' time, whether Bao Dai's government would be able to win the support of Southern Vietnam, and whether the Southern Vietnamese will want to reunite with the North. So that was the decision. The decision was supposed to be that they are going to come together as one, which is very different from what was happening in Korea itself. Okay. So, like I mentioned to you, when all the parties came in, the problem with the Geneva Accord was that there was a lot of agreement that was not accepted by many. For example, the American claimed that they are not bounded by the treaty. And that was a very interesting thing because later the American is going to be the one who decided that the 1956 referendum doesn't apply for South Vietnam, and therefore he doesn't want to act on. So the American didn't play fair in that sense. Now, the Southern Vietnamese also refused to accept approval, the idea that they are going to come together with a referendum. So as a result of this final declaration, which means that they are going to come together to choose a government to create a united Vietnam, was not signed by any of the parties. So it is up to the goodwill of the people whether they want to carry on, to agree, to pledge, to do what is mentioned in the agreement. So there was no law binding, there was no discussion whatsoever. The Geneva Accord biggest achievement was that it got rid of the French. I repeat, the Geneva Accord biggest achievement was that they got rid of the French. So technically speaking, Vietnam has removed their colonial master. So that was a good thing. But if you want to look at that beyond that, the Geneva Accord also mean that there was an establishment of a local government. In this case, there were two local governments that was being established. One was the Baudais government that was protected by the Americans. The second one was the more legit one, was the government that was set up by Ho Chi Minh, known as the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. So if you look at this context all this while, from the beginning, from the point of time in 1880s, all the way to 1954, you could see the growth in the nationalistic movement to the point of time in 1954, they are actually able to overthrow the French. And that was a very big achievement in terms of the nationalistic movement that was happening in Vietnam itself. So really a lot of credit has to be given to Ho Chi Minh, who is able to use the support from the Chinese and of course the support from the people in order to create the legit government that the Vietnamese wanted, which is the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. So with that in mind, okay, we've come to the end of chapter 3.1. Okay, to understand, like I mentioned to you, there are a lot of activities that was a lot of events that's given to you. You can actually take a look from the textbook, or for those of you who already subscribed to the Google Classroom, you'll notice that I've given you some announcements. Some of them are interesting websites that you can read. Okay, so this is what's going to happen. Now, what are you going to do next week? Okay, I have about 5 more minutes. Let me just brief you on what's going to happen next week. I will put up the lesson on Friday. I don't want you to stress yourself out. Just go and read through the textbook and understand the content first for today. Okay. Now, what I want you to do is something a little bit more fun. Okay. I want you to do an online research, and I want you to focus on the strengths and the weakness of the French, culminating to the French losing control of Vietnam in 1954. Some of them I already mentioned. So what I want you to do is that I want you, when you're doing your revising, I want you to make a conscious effort. I repeat that. I want you to make a conscious effort to think about the French weaknesses and the Vietminh strength. Think about what were the decisions that the French have done. Okay, pick them up. So these are your examples. Pick up the decision that's being done and try to group them. What weakness does it show about the French, or what strength does it show about the Vietminh? So what were the actions that they have done? What were the decisions that they have made? For example, French decision to attack the Vietnamese stronghold in Operation Lear. That is an example of a decision that was made. Okay, the French decision to come in to refuse to give the Vietnamese the so-called the status of a free state under the French Union. Okay, that was a decision that was being made. So all these are decisions. How does this decision led to the conflict, which finally led to Dien Bien Phu, which finally led to the 1954 French losing control? So the French did a lot of things. So what I want you to do is really to focus on some of the key events and examples, because this example can be used to illustrate what were the strategy, what were the things, what was the so-called the support base that the Vietnamese have, and so on and so forth. So all these things are example. For example, another thing, giving you another example, like getting Bao Dai to come back and hate the government. That was a decision, right? Why is it a good decision, or why is it a bad decision? Obviously, it's a bad decision. So tell me, what are the decisions? So from the decision, think about how does it show French weakness? Does the French actually realize what the people actually wanted? So that was already a weakness that you can see. So think about the action that the French were doing to consolidate their position. So how did they try to get control? What were some of the instances of the conflict before Dien Bien Phu? Okay, what were the reasons that will give you an idea why is it that did the French adopted the wrong strategy? what were the Vietminh counter strategy, and talk about the French defeat at Dien Bien Phu. So these are some of the areas that that you should include in your answer, but there are more things that you may be able to pick up. Use that to understand what is going on. So that is the task that you need to do for the next 2 sessions. I don't want you all to do homework after the lesson. I want you to do the online research during that 1 hour that was given to you. Okay, so that will free you up a little bit more time. You can actually do the online research, or if you get excited, you start reading up some of the interesting things, especially I think when it comes to military history, some of you might be interested. Go and find out a little bit more about what the Vietminh and the French were doing. Okay, some of the links that I shared with you on the Google Classroom, you can actually see some of the biblio, and there were other links that you can actually take a look at. Okay, so that will be what you're going to do for the next 2 sessions on day 2 and day 3. On day 2, okay, on day 2, Tuesday, I will be going online. But however, this online will not be a compulsory session. It's more for you to check on certain content that you're not very familiar with, or it could be about certain revision that you're already doing for the examination, for your end of the year exam. Okay, now this is actually a very, very good time. Okay, this is actually a very good time for all of you to start doing your revision on your other chapters. Don't be too caught up with doing things that is on the day-to-day basis. Take this time at home, start reading through the content of your textbook. Okay, you may want to start revising on your chapter, on your book 1 or even your book 2 now. Okay, before we come back for our revision, hopefully in term 2, or in term end of term 2 or beginning of term 3. Okay, so I'm not very sure what was going to happen, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, let me just move into, okay, so I'll stop the sharing now. Okay, so that pretty much are the key things that I want you to pay attention to for this particular chapter. I hope that is a little bit clearer for you. Don't get too caught up with the detail. The detail must be used to support exactly what you are learning. That means the reason. Focus on the reason, then use the content to support whatever things that you have. Okay, so take this time, go and do your revision on the other chapters. And on Tuesday, when I see you, do the task that will be assigned to you. I will also be going online for you to have a discussion with me just to check on your learning. Don't feel obliged to come in if you feel that there is nothing that you need to check with me. Okay, I'm still just a WhatsApp away. I'm still just an email away. You can send me your information, or you can send me a comment on the Google Classroom. So that will be one way that we can connect one another. Next week onwards, I will be, after Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday lesson, I will be giving you an essay for you to do, and during that 1 hour session. So go and revise on the content. Before that, then after that, I want you to write out the essay to your level best without referring to anything in your textbook. Okay, so that will be, the test will be on chapter, or should I say practice will be on chapter number 3.1, okay, on Vietnam. Okay, after that, we will start a little bit on chapter 3.2, and hopefully I can finish up seeing all of you in real time, in a real environment in school. Okay, if not, then we may have to continue this particular chapter, and we'll end off the whole entire revision. After that, then we'll move on to the revision aspect. Okay, but more practices as we go along. Okay, so for this chapter and the next chapter 3.1, 3.2 is only SEQ. I repeat, only SEQ. So focus on the content. Okay, very, very important for you to do so. Okay, that's all from me today. I hope you have a good lesson today, and I hope I got you all a little bit excited about what's going on. Go look for some pictures on the Chu Chi Tunnel. Go look at some pictures on some of the Vietminh strategy, because you'll notice that some of the things that we talk about in today's lesson, we are going to, the American actually repeated the same mistake. So obviously the American didn't learn their history. They repeated the same mistake that the French did. And that was why, at the end of it, of course, there were other factors that resulted to them losing, or should I say, retreating from Vietnam in 1975. But you'll notice that some of the things that we talk about today, they are going to repeat itself again when we talk about the American weaknesses in 1975. You're going to see something very, very similar. So go online, okay, explore it. Just go on Google search, go and look, use the keywords that we have, Vietminh strength, French weaknesses, Indo-China War, Geneva Accord. That will give you a lot of information that you can actually look up. Go and have fun exploring the thing. Learning doesn't stop with Mr. Ng telling you what you need to do. Learning continue. Find something that you're interested in, go and develop. Go and go along the same line. Go and find more things to look out for. Okay? Now it's now 9:30. Okay. Any other question? WhatsApp me. Okay, or send me a email if you really need to. You all have my email address. It's all found on your HBL lesson. Okay, so that's all. I will upload the video later once I get it done. I'll upload it into our Google site, and I will also put it on the Google Classroom. Those of you still not in the Google Classroom, please go and join now. Okay, that's all. Okay, I'll see all of you again. Okay, take care of yourself, stay safe. Okay, and you may exit the Zoom meeting now. Okay,
Thank you,
bye
Mr.
bye, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Ong.
Hey, hey, bye bye.
Thank you, Mr. Bye-bye.
Bye
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
bye.
Miss
Thank you,
Long.
Mr. Ong. Thank you, Mr. Ong.
Hey, bye
Thank you,
bye.
Mr. Long.
Hey, bye bye.
Thank you, Mr.
Bye, Juven.
Bye.
Bye bye.